We live? We are. All right. Right now, we want to call to order the City of Gallatin. This is a joint work session of the City Council and the Planning Commission, along with Greater Nashville Regional Council. Our mayor, she would like to be here tonight, but she had some prior obligations. So with that, I told her I would try my best to chair this meeting. I know today that there's a lot of things we all could be out doing, but it's good to see so many people show up, participate in this. This is very important for the future of Gallatin, not only our kids, ourselves, but in my case, my grandkids. It's a good thing that we've got this in place and we've got it going towards the goal of having a plan. And this plan is not only made up by the City Council, but also by the Planning Commission and the public. And my opinion on that is I'm really grateful that the public has weighed in on this, because they're taxpayers, and I do value their opinion. At this time, let's do a roll call first and bring this meeting to order. Ms. Kittrell, would you call the roll, please?
Vice Mayor Fennell.
Here.
Councilman Alexander.
Here.
Councilman Fan.
Here.
Councilwoman George.
Here.
Councilman Hayes, absent. Councilwoman Love, also absent. And Councilman Overton.
Present.
Now for the Planning Commission, Mr. Harris.
Here.
Ms. Hibbler. Absent. Mr. Murrell. Absent. Mr. Pereira. Absent. Mr. Strother.
Here.
And Mr. Wilson.
Here.
The roll.
Thank you, Ms. Kittrell. And I want to say that I'm sure there'll be more people show up, getting off work and fighting this traffic, and I know a few people that are on their way. I want to say that it seemed like it started 3.5, 4 years ago that we started this journey on trying to get a plan for Gallatin. And we've got a lot of growth going on in Gallatin, and it's hard to make everybody happy, but I feel confident in this plan, and it will give us some kind of direction that we need to follow and go. I know that GNRC has worked really hard on this plan. Michael Skipper and his staff, and we, the City of Gallatin, really appreciate what you guys have done for us, and I know you spent a lot of time on that, and I think this is really important. And with that being said, I see everybody that's in attendance, and I appreciate y'all coming out tonight and showing your support. And at this time, I'd like to bring up Mr. Michael Skipper, and let's get this thing started and see what he has to say. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Mayor. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure for us to be back in this room with you. About a month ago, we stopped by to release the first draft of the Plan Gallatin Comprehensive Planning document for public review and comment review by the council member and the Planning Commission as you ultimately shepherd this through your public adoption process. Tonight, we're back to take a deeper dive into the document itself. Hopefully, you've had a chance to review the material between the last meeting and tonight. We're going to walk you through each of the chapters in a high level, but pause for any comments or suggestions that you might have to help make it better before we do ultimately turn it back over to you for the public adoption process, which will come with, I suspect, quite a bit of public review and comment opportunity as you do go through that process through the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council. So again, tonight the agenda from our perspective is just to walk you through chapter by chapter at a high level, tell you what the purpose of each chapter is, what the objectives that chapter is trying to achieve, the key takeaways from our point of view, and some things for you to consider as you weigh in on comments that will ultimately shape the next draft for your consideration down the road. So that is our plan tonight, just walk you through chapter by chapter. We also have a couple of opportunities for you to comment in writing for us as we take this back to the staff. Here in a bit, once we get into the chapters, we're going to have yellow sticky notes, or these are index cards, not sticky notes, for you to record a certain type of comment, and the other color of card is going to be for another type of comment. I'll get to that here in a second. And then ultimately, before you leave out of here today, once we're through all the chapters, we do have a few maps that are pulled from the document that we'll want you to hover around just to make sure that the geographic geographic representation of the policies that are included in the draft plan are meeting your expectations. So with that, let me start off by finding the mouse and toggling over to the plangallatin.org website, which is going to be where you can find the document online. Great, thank you, Jeff. Okay, so here's the plangallatin.org website. It's really easy to get to the document through this gateway. The first item in the carousel here is a link to the hard to see the mouse. Link to the document. All right, and then this is an interactive version of the document that we're going to be going through. I'm going to go ahead and skip through the screen. I can't see it from where I'm sitting. Okay, and then if this is too small for you to interact with here, you could simply click. Is that mouse on the screen? Can you see that? Yeah, do you mind navigating on the computer if you can? Just over to launch the interactive flipbook. Thank you, Jessica. And while Jessica's doing that, let me go ahead and introduce the staff that is with me tonight. So we have Mary Turner, who's a community planner with the Greater Nashville Regional Council. She's been with us a couple of years. She works directly with local governments across the region and their planning commissions and local elected officials on growth and development issues. And then Jessica Hill is our Director of Community Regional Planning and oversees the work that we do at the local level, but also the regional planning that we do to help communities work together on some of the big challenges that our region faces together with respect to transportation, solid waste, economic development, and a longer list of challenges that we're faced with. So, Jeff, is that to you? Okay, perfect. Let's go ahead and bring up the website again. Perfect, and then Jessica's going to show you how to access the plan and then ultimately how to expand that plan to a full-page flippable document to make it easier for you to read through it.
Mike, you know we got a meeting that starts at 6 o'clock. And if we see that we're kind of going out too long, if you want to take a 10-minute break in between the presentation sometime, feel free.
Perfect, I appreciate that. Okay, and then there should be a button to expand that, Jessica, either at the bottom or at the top. I think. Looks like there we go. Okay, so I'll take it from here, but I will have you toggle over to the slides here in a second. Yeah, there you go. So this is this is basically the feature I was trying to get to. And we're going to go through this document together here in a second, all right? But let's go back to the slides and just kind of walk you through some of the highlights of Chapter 1, and then we'll come back over to this. And it's going to be interesting toggling back and forth. It's kind of difficult to see from where I'm sitting. Yeah, let's do that. That'd be helpful. Thank you, Mary. Okay, so again, this is a session with the City Council and the Planning Commission to listen to the comments and early feedback that you might have on the document. I've mentioned earlier that you can access the document through plangallatin.org, and we've shown you how to do that. In reference to the index cards that we have here, so as we go through each chapter, we're going to have you write down anything that you like about the chapter that you would like to see more of, or you'd like to drill deeper into some of the good stuff in the document. Go ahead and write those comments on the yellow sticky. I keep saying sticky cards. That was the original idea, but these are index cards. And then anything that causes concern or anything that you think we need to be addressing between the first draft and the second draft, you'll want to use the orange index cards for that. And just to make sure we're not losing track of your comments, before you write a comment on the card, just go ahead and label the top with the chapter that you're referring to. And again, as we go through these chapters, we'll pause to give you a chance to write down your comments. Yellow for things that you think is done well, that you want to see more of. Orange for things that might cause you concern or want to dig a little bit deeper into it to address an issue that you might have about the document. All right, sound good? All right, so let's go ahead and get into Chapter 1. Chapter 1 is the introduction of the document. Its objective really is just to introduce the readers to Plan Gallatin, its purpose, why the city is undertaking a planning process, just orientate people towards the sort of the overarching reasons why any city would pursue a comprehensive plan for growth and development. Included in this chapter is a description of the plan, the planning process, and also a set of commonly asked questions, the FAQs that are answered right there in Chapter 1. As far as your considerations for your review and comment, what we're looking for from you here is the purpose of the plan clearly stated? Sometimes these plans can get a little wonky, and we want to make sure it's accessible to the public and folks who just aren't, they're not trained in community and regional planning. It's important that they understand the language that's in the document and that is clearly communicating why it's important for a city to have a comprehensive plan. Another thing that we would like for you to consider as you go through the document is that list of FAQs. Just if we're missing questions that you get often in the process, either the planning process or just the decisions that you're making on a regular basis that impact growth and development that ultimately are derived from the policy represented in this plan, let us know that as well, okay? So we'll hop over to the document now, and I'll just take you page by page, and as I'm doing that, if you've come to the table tonight with comments already, please feel free to jot those down on the index cards. Again, yellow is intended for comments that reflects things that you really like the plan, that you might want to see more of, and orange are your comments that address concerns that you have about the chapter. And so can I get, Jessica, could you flip back over to the document? Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Sorry about that. We rehearsed before we came here tonight. All right, so here is a look at Chapter 1. It's a relatively short chapter, but the first few pages here are organized under key headers that pertain to key elements of the reasons and jurisdiction for a municipality to pursue a comprehensive plan. And then we get into the frequently asked questions. Okay, and again, if there's anything missing here in terms of the FAQs, we'd love to know that. It'd be very easy to incorporate them into the document. The other thing I'll mention is that plangallatin.org, as the plan moves to adoption, becomes part of the fabric of the community. The website itself will evolve and become a live version of the plan. So FAQs, as they change over time, will be maintained in an interactive way on the website. So even if the document is adopted with this set of FAQs, we can continue to add answers to commonly asked questions or continue to track your implementation through the website on the elements that are identified in Chapter 1's introduction. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary to walk you through what is in Chapter 2. And again, go ahead and take the opportunity to jot down any comments that you have. And as you do that and want to share it with the group to stimulate some conversation, just raise your hand and we'll call on you to do that.
We're going to toggle back to the slides to intro Chapter 2. So Chapter 2 is where we get into kind of the first chapter intros, the context for why we do the planning process and what it is, and answers those frequently asked questions. And then the second chapter provides the context for the document, really starts to lay the foundation on the history of the community, as well as a community snapshot that includes a lot of the current demographic information and economic information and socioeconomic information and key points. The key considerations that we want to talk about and have you look at for this chapter are the supporting graphics clear? And you'll see this graphics page where we have a lot of the information with the community snapshot laid out that has the demographic and social indicators for the community on there, as well as is there any additional information, demographic and socioeconomic characteristics that you think are important to include and that should be profiled for the community to lay the context for the rest of the document. So Jessica's just going to keep getting up and down and toggle back to the document for us now. Okay, so if we go to the next page, this kind of is the initial history of the community, and then the next few pages give the history of growth and show how the Gallatin, with these graphics, has changed throughout the years, all the way back, and then 5 years ago, and then all the way up till today. And this is the community snapshot page that I mentioned that gives a lot of the social and demographic indicators. And this is where we'd really like you to, if you have previously looked at it or are looking at it now, let us know if there's any characteristics that should be included here that are missing on this page, and whether these graphics are clear, or if we can present them in a way that makes this information more accessible for all the readers of the plan.
And this is another element of the plan that will become interactive on the website and be maintained over the next few years, as well as these metrics change. And hopefully, some of these metrics do change, particularly with respect to wages and income and just people's ability to prosper within the economy. Hopefully, efforts of the City Council and Planning Commission will really be aimed at elevating prosperity, and so we'll see, get to see these numbers change over time as the plan's implemented and the economy continues to grow.
So these numbers will be changed?
Well, they'll stay static in the document, but the website will be dedicated to giving you a live look at these numbers over time. That's right. Okay. Any immediate questions, comments about Chapter 2 and the community profile that we've got included in the document? Anybody see anything omitted in terms of the dashboard itself? Any other key data points you want to make sure that we're hitting on? Okay. All right, we'll move on to Chapter 3. Sorry, I think I'm fighting you again with the mouse. Okay. So Chapter 3 is really a segue between where the city has been and where it's headed into the future. And we call this Envisioning the Future and framing the discussion about how to prepare for the next generation. So the objectives of this chapter were to create an awareness of the implications of Gallatin's projected growth, and to establish a long-term vision and overarching set of goals and objectives for the plan to achieve while it is the policy for the city's growth and development. In terms of policy implications, starting with Chapter 3 and for the next several chapters, now we get into the implications of the language contained within that might ultimately shape some of the decisions that these two bodies are making moving forward. Specifically to this chapter and a few of the others, the goals and objectives that are identified in this chapter ultimately will be used to help prioritize decisions about land use and development, as well as the infrastructure investments that will flow through your capital improvement budget over the next several years. In terms of the main contents in this chapter, we have a description of the planning area, which includes the city limits, but also the urban growth boundary, which are the areas outside of the city limits that you anticipate developing into the future. Urban growth boundary, as you all know, is a boundary that's coordinated in partnership with the surrounding municipalities and the county government that is actually undergoing an amendment process right now. And so the plan reflects the proposed UGB as well. I know that'll be an important next step following the adoption of the plan, is to get that finalized in coordination with the other communities across Sumner County. We also get into the regional growth forecasts, and we do this in one of three separate ways within the plan document. One, we share with you the growth forecast out to the year 2045 based on current trends, and those trend projections are based on a regional outlook for growth and development based on current policies and growth trends across Middle Tennessee. But then we also explore two alternative growth scenarios in the document that were really the basis for a lot of the community engagement that we did, showing people the implications of a different type of way of growing on the things that are important to you in terms of quality of life. And so we present those alternative scenarios to remind people that the way you grow ultimately does matter to the day-to-day quality of life that you have in the community. And so we wanted to document those trade-offs that go into the considerations for future growth. We also get into the community feedback, and so we had several workshops in the wake of that scenario planning, we call it, where we looked at the different scenarios for growth and development. And we recorded into this chapter some of the key findings that we heard from the public with respect to growth and change. And then finally, we end the chapter with a look at the vision, goals, and objectives that have been further detailed in subsequent chapters in the document. As far as key considerations, I'd say the most important thing for you to be looking at in this chapter are the four goals, and then there are four objectives within each of those goals. And it's just really important that those four goals represent collectively the areas of aspiration as you move towards achieving the vision for growth and development. So we'll go over to the document here, but then when we come back for chapters 4, 5, and 6 and 7, we'll be detailing a little bit more through those chapters how you might approach achieving those goals. So here's chapter 3, and I'll get back over to the mouse. All right. And so here is a look at the Gallatin planning area, including the city limits and the urban growth boundary. We get into the regional growth forecast and the implications for the city of Gallatin. And then we look at the two scenarios, the alternative scenarios for growth and development that would have an impact on quality of life. The community feedback, both in terms of some of the survey results, in terms of the way the public prioritize the issues that should be addressed in the plan, as well as these four really overarching key findings that we heard over and over, workshop to workshop, with respect to growth and development and how the city ought to be responding to it. And then finally, the guiding vision and goals for the plan, which are laid out here on the spread here. Any immediate feedback or questions, comments about chapter 3 and what it's intending to accomplish? Okay. Again, if you have any comments that you'd like us to consider, feel free to put the things that you really like about this chapter on the yellow index cards, and any of the concerns you might have about its current condition on the orange cards. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mary for chapter 4.
Ms. Kitchell, Craig Hayes, Alana Edward, John Curry here.
Yeah, I can.
So the fourth chapter of the document is titled Growing the Economy, and digs into that first goal of the four goals, which is centered on creating a prosperous economy for the city. The objectives of this chapter is to really provide an overall description of Gallatin's growing economy and what ingredients it has and what are needed to provide for that success to continue, as well as provide those recommend actions to help the city achieve that goal. So as Michael mentioned, there's 4 different goals in the document, and then each of those goals has a number of objectives aimed at carrying out those goals. So this chapter lays out that first goal of creating a prosperous economy and those objectives that will implement that. The policy implications for this chapter are that those proposed actions, as I mentioned, can be used to prioritize decisions about the land use and infrastructure investments that the city makes in order to create a better environment for the economy to carry out. And the main contents of this chapter are the overview of the current state of the economy, as well as a discussion of those ingredients that will create success in the future, and proposed actions related to Goal 1. In this chapter, the key considerations that we want you all to look at and really consider are, is the economy as it is now described accurately in the background given in the chapter? Are the proposed actions that are included clear, concise, and desirable? Are there any actions that you think are missing? What do we need to add? And there are any actions that require further detail? Is there anything that's maybe too vague and needs additional language to make it clear and actionable? And then we're going to flip back over to the document so I can go through.
Excuse me, before you move that direction,
Absolutely.
can we actually step back and look at what this is? And let's take a deep dive here, because this is incredibly important for the community.
Yeah, James, we're going to bring up the actual document now. and
Yeah,
look at
so we
each of the
can
pages.
take a deep dive on the pages in the document.
All this information that you're giving us today, do you foresee COVID having any effect on any of this data that we're receiving?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a lot of implications that we need to pull from the pandemic. I think in terms of the way the city approaches infrastructure, it clearly needs to be responsive to the lessons learned and the new behaviors that have been sort of birthed through the pandemic. But the other thing that we're noticing with regard to COVID-19 is that as things do return to normal, people do are tending to revert back to their old ways. So I think, the city of Gallatin's not going to be alone in trying to figure out how the pandemic will have everlasting impacts on the city. But I think your question is the most important thing right now to consider, which is trying to understand how it will impact the city so your plan could be nimble moving forward. I think it's a good question and one that is still left to be answered by many communities across America.
And one of the things I'd like to interject is that a recent study came out by KPMG that by 2030, there are going to be 2.3 million manufacturing jobs that will not be filled. And I think we need to work that into our thought process as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, James. And I could tie this to some of the public engagement that we did. I mean, we were doing community engagement both before the pandemic and then unfortunately during the pandemic. And if anything, I think what the pandemic made people realize is how much they appreciate their neighborhoods and the walkability of their neighborhoods as they spend more time in their homes, working from home. I think they've rediscovered the city in a lot of ways because of sort of that forced work from home condition. And so I think when we're going through community engagement, at least near the tail end of this process, there were a lot more comments. There were already a lot of comments with respect to walkability and the quality of place. I think that was, if nothing else, that was a heightened finding near the end of the process. Okay.
So we have the document back open, and this is the intro page to Chapter 4. And then as we talked about, it starts with an idea of Gallatin's current economy. So this talks about those indicators on the right-hand side of the page. And again, I'm assuming these will probably be something that will be on the website and can be updated in years to come as the indicators change, and list those kind of key ingredients to create prosperity in the economy. This page lays out the proposed actions that contribute to the goals and objectives. So these are the actions that we would like you to really take a look at and dig into and understand if anything is missing in these actions, and also if anything needs to be detailed further or clarified on these pages. On the right-hand side, you can see that in addition to the text of the action, it also relates it back to what objective and goal we're touching on, to help you understand which of these is proposed to contribute to those larger goals and objectives that are in the document.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And I think this is really the most important part of the chapter are these proposed actions. And just like we did with the strategic plan that you adopted a couple of years ago, we'll want to ultimately assign roles and responsibilities so there's an accounting for who would be on first base, so to speak, with respect to implementing these actions. So your thoughts on which department, which agency, which part of city government, which of your external partners would be the most appropriate to identify as some shared ownership in implementing these actions. I think that would be some of what we're looking for in terms of your feedback. The other thing, as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we'll want to likely dive into a little bit more detail for 2 or 3 of these actions, the ones that you've considered the most important priorities for the short term. And what we can do is then unpack, say, if I can't really read this from where I'm sitting, but if that top action is the top priority, and it would just be coincidental at this point. This list is not in any sense of priority. But if it were, then we could take a page or 2 and really try to help folks understand how you might move to implement that action, and then what the direct translation would be if you did, just to illustrate why these actions are extremely important. And for this chapter, I suspect that James would have a very clear vision for which of these actions would be the biggest levers for improving the economy, and will be, I'm sure, James, you'll be an important part of the review team.
For this, for us to be able to zoom in on that right side, do you have the ability to just pull that right side up and allow that to be, right now it's.
Go ahead and pull it. Yeah, we can pull up the PDF, which is already open, and we can zoom into that.
Can we zoom on that right side?
Yeah, sure.
Because that's where we are right now.
Yeah, we'll pull up the PDF version here.
I had a question also about Forward Summer
Yes, ma'am.
and how involved they are.
Well, so Jimmy Johnston and Forward Summer are close partners with the city, obviously, and James, but also the Greater Nashville Regional Council. And that shop is actually working right now with their counterparts across the region on a regional economic development strategy. But in terms of the identified actions to the extent that you think they need to be involved. It'd be great to hear that. And that's something we can talk with Mr. Johnson about in terms of them getting some ownership. Because I know it's an organization that you're already investing in for the purposes of delivering on economic prosperity. It's a great example of what I mean by identifying roles and responsibilities so that these aren't just a list of actions that everybody thinks that somebody else is going to be doing. And James, I actually, we'll give you the floor if you care to walk through any of the ones that stand out to you on this list. I know the sort of the coordination on infrastructure investments is going to be important from an economic development standpoint, and finishing out some of the proposed roadway investments that provide more capacity to move workforce and freight and goods. Again, it's a balancing act, right? How do you do enough of that without sacrificing the scale of the community and the walkability? And so that's part of the challenge that the city faces, is how do you increase that capacity to be able to move volumes of folks going to jobs while also preserving that local commercial appeal within the neighborhoods.
And one of the things I'd like to inject into this conversation is the fact that a recent study by KPMG, who is obviously an internationally known group, just came out with a study where they're expecting that by the year 2030, which isn't that far away, 2030 may seem like a long way away, but it's not, to have 2.3 million jobs in manufacturing that'll be lacking. They're looking at a lack of employees of $2.3 million. So one of the things that this city council has embraced is that we're moving toward technology, so that we are looking at manufacturing specifically. And I think it's really important that we inject that into the conversation, because as we move away from manufacturing, this city has had some really impressive successes. And the successes will be much less, obviously, they'll be farther and few between as we move away from that. But I think it's important that we understand why we're doing that as a community, because of that incredible gap that will be announced, that they're announcing that will be, 9 years from now. And so as we look at what we're trying to accomplish here, let's please take that into consideration. We want those, those higher paying jobs that'll come. We just don't need to make sure we overload ourselves with manufacturing. We've got to diversify our employment opportunities in the city.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And then when we get to Chapter 8, the spatial aspect of this will be clearly represented in terms of the fact that you really need to think ahead and try to figure out or anticipate where those jobs are likely to go within the city. Make sure you have the appropriate policies in place to enable those jobs to manifest in the way that you anticipate. And then to make sure that you're prioritizing the infrastructure to and from those locations so that the private sector can be successful. And so again, a lot of this isn't necessarily rocket science. It's about thinking ahead and preparing for the eventualities that you would like to see in your community, so that you don't inadvertently preempt your ability to achieve that success by not thinking ahead. So this is Chapter 4. Any other comments or reaction to Chapter 4? Okay. Vice Mayor, at the mic.
No, thank you. Not right now.
Looked like you were going to say something.
I would like to say, though, towards the end of the meeting, we do have some citizens that had some input in this plan right there, that we could let them ask a few questions if we just limit the time and if we have enough time left at the end of the meeting.
Okay, sounds good to us. So we'll move on to Chapter 5. All right, Chapter 5 is really focused on helping you understand how to implement that second goal, which is a plan to create a sense of place. And so this is all about preserving character You're obviously a very fast-growing city within a very vibrant and rapidly growing metro economy within the United States. And that's exciting for a lot of people, but it's also scary for people who really have come to cherish this historic quality of the community, as well as just cultural assets that are out around town that ultimately could be vulnerable to rapid growth and development. So this shines a spotlight on preserving character for the purpose of creating a sense of place, or at least sustaining a sense of place into the future, along with the growth and development that we've been talking about. So the objectives of this chapter is to provide an overall description of the characteristics that the community thought was worth preserving throughout the community engagement process, and to recommend specific actions to help the city achieve goal number 2, which is all about preservation and conservation of the things that are important to the community. The policy implications, just like with the last chapter, these proposed actions can be used to prioritize decisions about land use as you're weighing in on zoning requests and proposed development. You'll want to refer back to all these chapters in terms of ultimately making those decisions about what is implemented within the city. But also very much the policy implication here is that it ultimately drive your public investments in infrastructure and the other programming that you may implement to try to protect some of the unique identity of the city of Gallatin. In terms of the main contents, we've got an overview of the characteristics worth preserving, the beginnings of a dashboard to bring to you some metrics related to preservation and conservation that will ultimately migrate to the website in a more interactive way. And then we've got proposed actions that would help you achieve the aspirations of goal number 2. And just like with the last chapter, the key considerations here are, number 1, is Gallatin's character described accurately and appropriately within the plan? Given the level of detail that we're going into, are we doing enough to make sure that we're covering the full range of things that you think are important to preserve? And then are the proposed actions clear, concise, and desirable? Are these things that you expected to see in the plan, things that you want to see in the plan? Are there any actions that you think are missing? And then are there any actions that you think we should dive into more detail with? And just like the last chapter, we do want to identify 1 or 2 actions from this chapter that you think are the most important to be addressing in the short term, and then unpack those a little bit more over the course of a couple of pages so that we provide a little bit more clarity on why those would be beneficial. So we'll hop back over to the document itself. I think the online is easier. Great. And so just like with the last chapter, we're profiling, at least in narrative form and visually, the key sort of attributes that the sort of the elements of the community that people think are worth preserving, everything from historic properties and districts to the natural beauty of the surrounding landscapes. We've got a look at some key metrics related to preservation and conservation, and then again, a list of proposed actions that all tie back to the objectives within goal number 2. So your feedback on these proposed actions are probably the most important for us, just to make sure these are aligned with your expectations. And again, about to the point about roles and responsibilities, any ideas you have about parts of city government or external partners, nonprofits, public agencies at the county, regional, or state, federal level that you think can help out, we'll make sure that we're identifying them as key partners as we look towards implementation.
I'm not sure I understand number 10.
What does number 10 say? Jessica, can you read that out loud?
Restrict inappropriate non-residential encroachment in established residential neighborhoods.
Can you read that?
Yeah, she just did.
Yeah.
Restrict inappropriate non-residential encroachment in established residential neighborhoods.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is, one, that wording is not doing anybody any good, right? So we need to make sure that wording is a little bit more clear. But I think what we heard and what led to that was, being careful about the type of residential that is coming on board within neighborhoods that are already well established, so that you're not altering the character so significantly that you've lost the sense of place in these older neighborhoods. That's what that is getting to, but it's that is kind of wonky language. All right. More of that. Those are those are the type of comments we love to hear. Any other questions or comments about this chapter?
So if a proposed action does not have a related objective with it, is that a flaw in the plan?
Well, it's the first draft, so it could be a typo, or maybe the graphic didn't present. The intent is for every action to have an objective. And then ultimately, every action should be aligned with roles and responsibilities as well, which is just not in the document up to this point. So we'll have to look to see why that one does not have an associated objective, but that's not the intent. And I don't know if, Jessica, if you could easily identify which objective that would be aligned with or not. It's hard for me to see the plan from where I'm sitting, but we'll take care of that.
Just didn't know if the absence of a related objective out beside the action means we need to review those objectives and add one.
Yeah, that's good logic. I think in this case, it's probably just a graphic that's not appearing in the document. Another thing to be thinking about as we move forward in the process is that there is a school of thought here that we heard loud and clear throughout the process from folks who would like to see guidance on how you would measure your progress. So performance measures that relate to these objectives, right? The primary difference between a goal and objective typically is that a goal is sort of a long-term outcome that you're trying to achieve, and then the objectives are the more shorter-term aspirational things that you're going to be implementing that are measurable progress towards a goal. So as you review these objectives and you imagine ways that we might be able to measure progress towards these, we'd love to know that as well. Okay, any other questions about Chapter 5 before we move on with Chapter 6? Again, point of this evening is just kind of introduce you page by page to the document itself. Make sure you feel comfortable diving in with your sleeves rolled up to exhaust the cliches, just to make sure that everybody's good with this document before it does get entered into the public review and comment process.
Yeah, Ms. George, kind of elaborate a little bit on that item that you brought up, number 10. That is kind of a general policy that is intended to restrict or avoid spot zoning, as it's commonly known, so that you don't go in and put in inappropriate use. It could be density of a development as well. You don't want to put a 30-unit apartment complex on 1 acre surrounding by single-family homes, for example. Not that that's realistic, but it may occur in some communities. But there are some aspects that are being advocated by the plan that promote form-based codes in the downtown area and maybe a few other areas where things like that could occur, but they would be highly regulated. So that's about what that policy is, that action.
All right. Do we want to, have we flipped through the document itself yet? Is that what we're doing now? Okay. Okay, sorry. I'm fighting her on the mouse again. Okay, so Chapter 6, you're up, Mary.
Do you want to go back to the slide? Okay. So Chapter 6 is focused on maintaining livability. Jessica, if you just want to go, this is the cover page for Chapter 6, or who's flipping? Sorry. So Chapter 6, again, provides a background and gives those metrics that give an overall description of what the livability is currently in the community, and then recommended actions that help to achieve goal number 3 is the goal that this chapter is really looking to implement. The policy implications here are that actions in this chapter can be used to prioritize, again, as we talked about, decisions related to land use and infrastructure investments that'll further livability for the community. The main contents in Chapter 6 are an overview of the factors that will ensure livability and quality of life for the residents here in the community, and the main and those actions that contribute again to that goal. The key considerations are similar to they've been for the other chapters. We really want to understand if the issue of livability and quality of life is described accurately in this chapter and is understandable and digestible, and are the proposed actions clear, concise, and desirable, and then what actions might be missing and what actions might need to be further clarified, like we just, for example, talked about action number 10 in the previous chapter. So if we'll go back through to the document. This is the cover page, and then the next will go into kind of the indicators that describe the livability for the community and make the place livable. So there's that dashboard page on the right, and a description of those key factors that create a quality of life, elevated quality of life in the community. And then the next page will dive into those proposed actions that contribute to goal number 3. And I don't know how well we can see these on the screen, but if there is any of these actions that need to be clarified further or discussed that, or might be the priority actions to dive into in additional pages, let us know.
On the objectives, 3.2.
We can zoom in here on the document to 3.2. So objective 3.2 is to shape the built environment to encourage active and healthy lifestyles.
Shape the built environment.
Yeah, so the built environment would refer to all of the buildings, residences, commercial, any kind of structure, as well as the underlying infrastructure so roads, sidewalks, bike lanes, all that is part of creating a more walkable or livable place that's going to contribute to an active and healthy lifestyle. So whether people can, walk in their neighborhood or walk to the convenience store or bike where the parks and recreation facilities are.
Do we have in this a plan or any definition of what financial livability is going to be? Livability is different for different people.
Yeah, so in this chapter, livability is referring to the affordability of place. Can you live in the community with the prevailing wage that is being paid to the workforce? Are you able to, easily access social and recreational amenities within the community? Are you able to get out and about in a safe and efficient way, whether it is to exercise or just to enjoy the community? So it's a feeling of being safe. It's creating a place that's affordable. And it's creating a place for you to be connected to your community socially and recreationally. But it is a good question and one that needs clarifying. Do you have a definition of livability that you like to use that we might want to?
I just wonder if we're going to have one in the end, because that's going to be very important when this all goes in place.
Yeah, livability is one of those terms that it's a pretty loaded term, right? It conjures certain things in people, but in the context of a comprehensive plan, it's worthwhile to define it specifically. So we agree with you, Councilmember.
I'm backtracking a little here, but do we have a formula for deciding what type of jobs to recruit for as far as our education, our training, our technology? Manual labor is going to be real important. Are we going to have some kind of, put that in place where we can have manual labor?
Yes, sir. So the important aspect of this plan is that this plan links up to your city's economic development vision, because what that formula is going to be changing on a schedule that's going to be different than your land use policies. And so one of the really great things about this document, I think, is the way it respects those other efforts that are ongoing parallel to this, and make sure that the decisions that are made about land use and infrastructure are informed by formulas such as what should your target workforce and job creation, retention strategy be, and I think that's where, the EDA comes into play as they represent sort of that collaborative between city government and the private sector to make sure that those formulas are keeping up with the expectations of the community. James, I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, but.
Would love to. Having followed the city's strategic plan, I think it was 4 years ago now, where they indicated as a whole that we wanted to pursue technology and technology-related companies. It directly addresses your concern there. As I mentioned earlier, the KPMG study that just came out said by 2030 there'll be 2.3 million manufacturing jobs that will not be filled. And so aggressively, 3-4 years ago, we decided to pursue technology as opposed to manufacturing because that seems to be the direction that everything's going. And we are truly, as a unit, as a city, pursuing jobs that are not manufacturing related. We will support local companies and their expansion, but it's time for us to expand the employment opportunities in our community. And that's been the goal and the drive of your economic development agency that you've established. All that being said, we really need to pay attention to what's coming in, and we appreciate and would welcome input into that, Mr. Fan, because it will truly establish, the trajectory of this community as we move forward. Your questions?
But it is, we're talking about retail and restaurants. The labor pool is shrinking.
Yes.
I think we need to, I don't know what the plan is, but we need a plan for it.
That, actually, if I could. My board and the Industrial Development Board recently held a retreat, and that was one of the major things that came up. The first 45 minutes of the conversation were what we need. We need those amenities. For us to move forward as a community, we need the dining, we need the shopping, we need those things, and those are incredibly difficult call right now. Given, where everybody is with COVID, with everything else, it's hard for us. But we understand as a group, that's the direction we need to do, that we need to head to make sure we do that, because we are not going to get, and I hate to call it white collar, but again, diversified employment opportunities if we don't have those amenities. And so that's what, as an office, we are pursuing at this point in time. We have, right now, a request for close to 700,000 square feet of industrial space, but it's just expansion of local businesses. And that's what we're looking at, because we don't want to bring in a new business that's going to need 300 people, because it will cannibalize our workforce right now. So we're concentrating on amenities at this point in time to fulfill what you're concerned about.
All right, Mr. Skipper.
Thank you. And then.
Hold on a second, Mr. Skipper.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bergier has a question.
Just a quick question, and I apologize if this has already been answered in the first 15 minutes when I was trying to get here. The proposed action items, are they numbered in sequence of priority as how the community prioritized them?
They're not right now, no.
Didn't know if there was a
But I
ranking.
think that is something that we want to try to achieve, is have some sense of priority. If not priority, at least a temporal priority. So, sequentially, how would you pursue these actions?
That would be really helpful to me, because there's a lot of action items and they all sound great, but I'm not sure which ones were listed as the most important to the community.
Well, and that part of it is that we didn't want to imply any priority here, because what we need to identify is what, 1, 2, or 3 from each of these lists are the most important for you to pursue in the next couple of years. And again, then take the time to unpack those a little bit within the document and help illustrate, how you might pursue implementation of that action, and then what the benefit would be of doing so.
What's the timeline on this being completed?
Well, that's, as it's the pace set by the city, so we're with you until the end.
Whatever that is.
All right. So that was chapter 6. On to 7. And chapter 7, Bill, you have a comment?
Come here, Bill.
Yeah, the livability part of this is pretty broad, and it certainly needs to incorporate a lot of the actions that are included in the other chapters. One thing that Michael mentioned that's not emphasized in this draft right now is to tie some kind of measure to these objectives. And that's going to be really important for the city and how aggressive you want to be. As James was mentioning about how the demographics of the employment workforce are going to be changing over time. Does the city want to get aggressive with these objectives and the measurable objectives that I think we need, more so than just kind of the statements that we have? For example, affordable housing. Do we want to provide a certain percentage of our housing would be considered affordable housing, and that's based on percentage of your income that you can accommodate to provide for housing, whether it's rental or purchase. And also, a lot of these social economic indicators are the basis from which you want to establish those measurable objectives. And this is where it gets kind of difficult, is do we want to, where do we want to move the city? So if our poverty level is, say, 12 or 13% or something like that, we want to reduce that, I would think. We don't want to stay stagnant, and we don't want to keep a stagnant level of poverty. We want to be aggressive, and this is going to take a lot more hard decisions to do that. So if you want to, in the next 20 years, reduce the population's level of poverty to, say, 8% or something obtainable. You know, obviously we wouldn't want to wipe it out completely, but we need to be able to make the hard choices to be able to move in that direction. So that's something that you want to look at. Otherwise, if we just, are we going to be driving this train, or are we just going to be riding on it? So I really want you to think about that when you start reading through each one of these action items, is what's that's going to do, and are these objectives measurable? Now, I use kind of a harsh maybe example here, but each one of these objectives could be and should be tied to some sort of measure similar to the example that I gave you. So keep that in mind too.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, chapter 7, this is all about infrastructure. So we talked about the economy, we talked about character, we talked about livability. This is about infrastructure. And just like the last 3 chapters, this is digging into the things that you can do to address one of the goals. Specifically, this is addressing goal number 4, which is really a plan to provide quality infrastructure. Objectives: provide an overall description of Gallatin's infrastructure and the state of infrastructure across the city. This is hard to do in a small amount of real estate within the document. You have a lot of infrastructure, so we're looking for feedback from you in terms of what level of detail should we go at to describe your infrastructure versus, you know, putting more emphasis on the things that that are available to you to improve it. But objective number 2 is to recommend actions to help the city achieve goal number 4, as I mentioned. Again, the policy implications here are that what this chapter is representing is ultimately going to be guidance to help you make sure that you're making good decisions about how you're spending your, not just your local money that goes into infrastructure, whether we're talking about roads, water, sewer, solid waste facilities, but also how you pursue state and federal grants that can help you pay for that infrastructure. Often, you know, you don't just throw a bunch of stuff at the board and see what sticks. You got to be very strategic about what grant applications that you put into the hopper, because you might just get one of those grants one day and have to implement the project. So it's got to be ready to go, and you want the projects that are ready to go to be the ones that are addressing the most immediate priorities. The main content, overview of Gallatin's infrastructure, as I mentioned, and then the proposed actions related to Goal 4. And with the previous 3 chapters, we're looking for you to make sure that we're describing the infrastructure adequately enough within the context of the comprehensive plan, and that the actions are on par with your expectations. Is anything missing? Is anything not stated clearly or concisely enough. But I think more than any of the other chapter, this is the chapter where I want you to identify which 2, 3, or 4 actions that you want to go into a deeper level of analysis in the plan. So for example, there's probably an action on the list, I just can't see which one it is. It's talking about updating your major roadway, your major thoroughfare plan, so your major and collector street plan, the plan for sidewalks and greenways and bicycle trails. That plan, the idea being that plan needs to be updated to account for the growth trends that we've been measuring over the last year and to account for the feedback that we've gotten from the community. And so that's something we work with Nick and Bill and the various staff on to make sure that there's a representation of how your major roadway and collector plan would be amended as a result of the update to the comprehensive plan. So that's an action that we know you'll likely want to go into more detail. Which other actions do you think we need to be showcasing within the document to give folks an understanding of where their city is headed with respect to infrastructure? So any immediate feedback on this chapter before we move on?
I noticed that the Gallatin City Hall is 46 years old, and that's all we say about it, and it definitely needs a facelift. I don't see that anywhere.
Yeah. Good comment. Yeah, we can showcase that.
Anyone else?
Economical growth is great, but if we don't develop our infrastructure where people can get out and get their respective jobs, then they're just stuck in their respective communities.
Yeah.
And so that would take priority over some of the other stuff.
I couldn't hear you, sir.
Okay. Our economic development is great. We're trying to recruit and try to get people here. But unless we develop our infrastructure where people can get out and get to work, they're stuck in their respective communities and there's no place to go. So I think that needs to take priority over some of the other things, and then we can address the other issues.
And I agree, and I think Mr. Tuttle and his crew have the ability to have input into that, and I think that's vitally important.
Because I think we need to develop a relationship with the state and other agencies in regards to getting grants and things like that so that we can develop our roadways. We're constantly improving housing and people are moving in, but they're going into 2-lane roads. They can't get out. And if our major thoroughfares are broke, or if there's an accident or somebody can't get out, then we're creating more problems. If people can't get they can't pick the kids up from school or things of this nature, then that's a deterrent toward people moving to our area.
That's
So-
accurate. You're very accurate in that, and one of the things I think Mr. Tuttle and his crew, thank you, you're correct. That's an accurate, assumption or visualization of a lot of what's going out there. I think please converse with Mr. Tuttle. He and his crew have put together a plan. They've got this, vision of what needs to be accomplished out there. And of course, as in everything, almost, it all boils down to funds. He's got a great vision of what needs to happen out there. And I think the public transportation part of it is almost beyond our purview because it has to be a regional thing. And our mayor is fully involved in those conversations. TDOT is involved in those conversations. I think you may be aware that they're looking at, redoing some of the interchanges in the area. That's something that really requires a lot of thought and a lot of funding to move forward. But again, I encourage you to have a conversation with Mr. Tuttle because he truly does have a grand idea of what it needs, to make that happen. But you're spot on with your conversation there.
Any other questions, Mr. Puryear?
For my third question for the night.
Yes.
I may have overlooked it, but obviously in this day and age, access to broadband and internet infrastructure is really important. And I don't see an action item in here. And for that matter, does the city have that much influence over developing its 5G infrastructure network throughout?
Yeah, I mean, it's not, that is a subject that comes up often in regional conversations about economic development. It wasn't something that came up specifically within the context of Plan Gallatin, and it may just be because people feel like there's adequate access to broadband and high-speed internet here, but if that's not the case, then that needs to be something reflected in the document. So I think,
there's adequate access to the current levels of technology, but for instance,
but the emerging, yeah.
the emerging 5G, we need to accommodate for that in our planning to allow for the, as I understand, I think that the terminals are really close together rather than spaced out cell towers. I just want to make sure that something's in there to address that because it's extremely important part of the infrastructure.
Yeah, well, consider it done, because at the very least, and this came up at the Regional Transportation Policy Board that Mayor Brown is a part of with other mayors across Middle Tennessee. This came up, I guess we had our board meeting last week, and the issue of even if a city's not taking the lead on implementing the 5G technology, how can they ensure that there's good coordination as you are pursuing infrastructure projects that are opening up conduits and other things that could be the vehicle for some of this infrastructure, that you know when and how to engage with the appropriate officials so you're not missing opportunities to bring down the cost of this infrastructure. So yeah, we'll make sure that's accounted for.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, Mr. Skipper.
All right, we'll turn it over to, I think at this point, we'll probably just turn it over to Mary for chapter 8, which was really, I mean, if you had to pick one chapter that is the most important to focus on in your review, it's going to be chapter 8, which is all about aligning these other things that we've been talking about, the economy, preservation of character, the livability, and the infrastructure, aligning all of that to each other spatially across the geography as you grow and develop. So Mary, you're up with managing growth and change.
Yeah, so Michael kind of just gave the overview, the background for this slide, but Jessica, if you want to go into the next one. So the objective in this chapter, as Michael mentioned, is to translate all of those other to how we spatially prioritize it across the city. And so this chapter describes the existing land use as it is within your urban growth boundary and key considerations for future development of the land in the urban growth boundary. So we, in this chapter, identify anticipated change and the community's desired character for that change. So we'll talk a little bit about the series of maps that are included in this chapter, and one of those talks about which areas of the community we feel are more likely to see a higher degree of change moving into the future. And this chapter also establishes guidelines for future development to some degree. We have character area spreads, which we'll pull up when we go through the page book, that give an idea of what future development will look like in other areas of the city, what the community wants that to present as, inform. The policy implications in this chapter are really kind of separated into 3 maps that describe three different elements. And the first being that degree of change, as I mentioned, that helps to guide the city's focus and investment on areas that we anticipate to see more changes coming in the future, and which areas might remain more static or might need additional support for infrastructure that's existing there. And then the next map that is the policy implication in this chapter is the character areas map. And that is where we really dive into the character area spreads that we'll look at that give an idea of what the desired form is and different aspects that are going to be in that character area in the city. So I think we touched on this in the presentation we did last month a lot. There's the land use, transportation, open space, all described through a series of pictures for what that'll look like per that character area. And the designated sub-areas are identified areas in the community where there needs to be a higher level of focus. So following is one of the steps that might come from this to implement the plan will be to do a deeper dive into those specific areas and develop sub-area plans. The main contents of this chapter are those drivers of growth, so an understanding of future development and the community character policy and the designated sub-areas. So the main contents of this chapter are really kind of those 3 maps and the descriptors that go with them. So for this, the key considerations are a little bit different than we've talked about in the previous chapters. One of the key considerations for this will be, does the geography align with the city's vision? So that'll be the mapping exercise, which I think we're going to hold off to the way out. It'll be less of something that you can do on your index cards in front of you. It's hard to comment on geography in that way, but we have copies of the maps that are available for you to comment on geography. And then are the visualizations sufficient to communicate the policy intent? So this is those character area spreads that will pull up on the screen. And we want to understand if the images that are there and the descriptors are sufficient enough to communicate what your vision is for that area of the city. And are the guidelines suitable for guiding growth that's going to come to the community? Or is there, more needed or something that needs to change? So flipping back over to the document. I'm not sure what makes sense.
Maybe the document first, then we'll come back to the maps.
So this is the page that describes the drivers of growth. So what is bringing additional growth to the community? The map on the right-hand side is the existing land use map, and we have a couple copies of that here just to use as reference to understand. This is the page that represents the future development, and that map down there is the degrees of change. There's 3 degrees of change that were identified: nurture, sustain, and preserve. And each will have a different level of focus for the city to understand what additional infrastructure or investment focus needs to happen based on what amount of change that area is likely to see. This page is where the community character area policy is described. And each of these, as I mentioned, in the next pages of the document has a spread. Here's an example. So the downtown core area, which is focused in the historic downtown of Gallatin, would have its future character described through these images on this page. As you can see, there's land use, transportation, open space, and there's descriptions of what the desired future form or type of that might look like per that character area. So definitely take a look at this and let us know if the images that are on this page and the descriptions here are enough to communicate what the future intent is for those areas. So again, these go through each of those character areas. This is the page where we describe those sub-area designations. So as I mentioned, these are specific points in the community that will need a deeper dive following the comprehensive plan. So the sub-area plan is going to be a step to implement a further vision or further regulation for specific areas where there might be, a focused amount of growth or anticipated change to that area.
Yeah, and that map is, I think, really key in trying to understand where the amenities would be located that James mentioned earlier. These mixed-use commercial districts where you could get some really good density and a walkable environment that gives people access to a lot of quality of life amenities. And then also on this map, you see anticipated locations. Some of these are already emerging or already close to being built out, but these are really, think of these as your major employment destinations across the city that would require an additional level of analysis as to what kind of infrastructure would be needed to support the jobs that are anticipated for those areas, and what types of land uses should be in close proximity to those job sites to provide a comprehensive and full experience for folks living in those areas.
I'd like to step back just a bit. You had a definition of sustained, minimal change, and accelerate, proactive change. And that's back 3 or 4, 5, 6 pages. Okay, so right there, I think, and it's most likely just a typo, and we'd like for you to address this. The sustained minimal change and the accelerate proactive change are almost word by word exactly the same.
Okay, yeah, we'll fix that. I think that the public present. Perfect. Yeah, I was offering $5 per typo for anybody who was.
Oh, yeah.
To point
So,
that
super.
How many words? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Okay, Mike.
Any other immediate reactions to Chapter 8? Yeah, this is a first draft, so and wanted to be transparent about where we are and get it out as soon as possible.
Where the density ranges are, I think
ma'am.
low density and very low density needs to be reversed.
Okay. And there's a tendency for the rest of us to look at the big picture because we know Bill is going to come up with the red line edits for grammar and typos, right, Bill? But we all have to do our part. So thank you for that. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, remarks about Chapter 8 before we move on to Chapter 9, which is the concluding chapter of the document? All right, let's go on to Chapter 9. Oh, well, let me say before we get to Chapter 9, the next couple of slides that we had in the PowerPoint are just really visual cues to you all to stick around after we talk about Chapter 9 and your, and the Vice Mayor says we can get up and move around. We've got some maps over here that we want you to take a look at that are just very difficult, as Mary said, to comment on with your index cards. So if any of the geography regarding those three types of designations give you pause, just go ahead and let us know that via the maps. We've got a map for the degree of change layer, for the community character areas, as well as those designated sub-areas. So thank you. Moving on to Chapter 9, which is all about taking action and identifying some next steps following the adoption of the comprehensive plan. This chapter, in terms of its objectives, is to provide recommendations to help the city implement and maintain the plan and to offer strategies to ensure the plan's success. One of the things that's really important to remember about the comprehensive plan is it's intended to, as a whole, represent the vision that the community has for itself moving into the future, and to provide some guideposts and guidelines to help you make decisions through your regulations and the incentives that you pursue, but also the other planning documents and other parts of city government. So it's really important as we think about implementing this plan that we recognize the relationship that this plan is going to have with the EDA, for example, when it comes to economic development, or your Department of Public Works or engineering when it comes to infrastructure and on the roadways and solid waste. And so the intent of this plan is to make sure that it's informing the decisions that are being made by City Council and the Planning Commission that ultimately are going to be executed by city departments across town. So a lot of the proposed recommendations in this chapter are really aimed at those subsequent efforts that you may encounter after the adoption of the plan. In terms of the policy implications, I mean, this is pretty clear. Those subsequent efforts are going to be things that need to be budgeted for, things that you need to program into the work of the various bodies, boards, committees, commissions of city government, the departments themselves, the staffing, the budgets that they're provided to implement the plan. Main contents of this chapter are planning recommendations and strategies for success. What we're looking for here in terms of the feedback are the proposed recommendations clear, concise, and consistent with what you would have expected? Are there things that you know that need to be done following the adoption of the plan that need to be identified in the plan so that we're being transparent with the public about the relationship between the document and the things that you might be considering as a council in the wake of its adoption? And then are there any steps that require further detail? I do think that we went into a fair amount of detail on most of the proposed recommendations in this chapter, but we stopped short of language that would prescribe a specific approach because I imagine you'll want to have the discretion to design and implement these recommendations in a way that makes the most sense for you all in the room. So that's a look at Chapter 9 in terms of its objectives and the key considerations. Here's a look at Chapter 9 in terms of the document itself, and I'll go ahead and let you drive that because I can't see the screen. So the first section, as I mentioned, are planning recommendations. The first recommendation here is to finalize the proposed amendment to the urban growth boundary, which would have implications for the way you coordinate with county government and the adjacent municipalities when it does come to planning for growth and the infrastructure that would be necessary. But Bill also mentioned or made reference earlier to really the regulatory aspect of the comprehensive plan is the zoning ordinance, at least from the standpoint of land use and development standards. And so anytime a city updates its comprehensive plan, it's very common for them to follow up that plan adoption with an evaluation of the zoning code to make sure that it's consistent with the community's vision. And embedded within this recommendation is some thought around pursuing form-based codes in different parts of the city, particularly downtown Gallatin, where you're going to be concerned a little bit less about the use of the property and more concerned about its form and how it relates to the urban design and the context that it's operating within. Because within certain parts of the city, you're going to want a mixture of uses. It's just important that you're not you're not building things that are incompatible with each other from a form standpoint. So, and then moving on to strategies for success, it's really more of a reminder to things that you already know, which is that you're not alone in the pursuit of Gallatin's future. There's the Greater Nashville Regional Council, which has tremendous resources. State agencies, federal agencies all come to the table with funding to help you implement your ideas for the future. And so, one key strategy is to make sure that you are establishing those partners, as the commissioner mentioned earlier. And one good way to establish those partners, a lot of these grant agencies, when they're looking to award money out, they're looking for comprehensive plans that are establishing a vision for the community so that they can be assured that their investment is going to be consistent with what the city is wanting over the long term. And so one of your biggest strategies for success is the adoption of the comp plan to communicate that vision to the granting agencies that are out there looking to invest in Gallatin over the next couple of decades. So that's a look at Chapter 9. Any immediate reaction here? Any comments, suggestions, remarks?
James Fenton.
If I may, making noises here. I encourage this body to truly dive deep on this. As you know, the last plan that was adopted by the Planning Commission was not adopted by the City Council, and it was used pro and con whenever they went forward. And for this body to truly embrace, this plan or a plan, not this plan necessarily, you make sure this plan is what you want. Will adhere to what Michael was saying, allow us to garner additional funds. We need to be united. We need to spend time and put this off 2 or 3 months if you need to. Dive deep into it. Look into what this is doing and create the plan for what this city has in front of it. And there is nothing that this city can accomplish at this point in time. We have so much going for us right now. If this entire body comes into complete appreciative, and acceptance of a plan, it will accomplish it. And take the time, delve deep, ask Michael extremely difficult questions. Ask his staff difficult questions. What are we trying to accomplish? What are we doing here? But if we do this as a city, we're already miles ahead of most people. And if we can come together as a body, as two bodies, and make sure we're on the same plane, Gallatin will knock it out of the park. So please take time to look at this and ask questions and make decisions.
Thank you, James. Michael?
Mr. Chair, that is it for the content tonight, aside from inviting you to take a look at these maps. Again, we're with you to the end on this, and I do respect the words that came out of James's mouth with regards to diving into this and making sure you feel comfortable and that we haven't missed something. It's really important that it reflects the interest and vision of the community, but that the plan itself is a tool to help you make those subsequent decisions, which are going to be much more difficult decisions to make than adopting a comprehensive plan. A comprehensive plan is supposed to be a forward-thinking document that empowers and enables great things to happen in its wake. And it makes the case for those decisions to be made down the line in a way that would be aligned with the expectations of the community, which in theory should make those decisions a lot easier for you to make. So it's important that this be something that you're proud of and that you think reflects the interest of the community. And that's not easy to do because in any given community, there is a diversity of thought about how the future should unfold. And we have strived to make this plan nimble enough, flexible enough, so that you can do the things that you need to do to make sure that everybody who lives in Gallatin feels like there's something in it for themselves. And so we'll be around to answer additional questions after the work session. But other than the maps, that'll be it for us this evening.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
I have a question. Hearing what James just said about the commission adopting a program that did not get accepted by the council, is there anything we can do this time that can get us on the same page?
I can,
Go ahead, Mr. Puryear.
I can speak to that, because I was on the commission, the planning commission, when that happened. It wasn't that council didn't accept the plan. It was the planning commission failed to ever send it to council. We had the option of adopting this as a plan we would follow, and we really liked the plan, or sending it to council, and council might have changed it. And that was an example of the two bodies, planning commission and council, not working in concert with one another. And so this whole process that y'all have done now has been done the right way. And I just really admire the fact that it's gotten public input. And from the very beginning, it's been a process that we said, this is going to be adopted by council. We'll all be in concert. We weren't in concert years ago when we did it. Now you're done right. So to answer your question, it's being done right. This is it.
Thank you, Mr. Puryear. One thing I want to mention since we're live on Facebook is that the mayor's office and some of our department's heads has been in contact with Humphreys and Dixon counties, and we're offering support and that we stand ready to assist. Additionally, the city will be posting links to volunteer opportunities in the coming days. I'd like to announce that right now, and then we'll try to announce it again during our other meeting. Right quick, if there's somebody in the audience that would like to come up and say something and limit your question, you can come up here. If you have something to say, Mr. Javons, you can. We're kind of on a time, so please limit.
Thank you, Sean. Michael, thank you for the work you're doing. It's great. You have been available and responding to email really quick, and Bill and everybody involved. That's a good start, great document. Just have a couple of questions. When you start the document, there is a paragraph who said that the law states that on the general plan is adopted, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Those elements of the plan related to land use decision become effective pursuant to the guidance in Chapter 7 of this document. Chapter 7 is infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just so that the chapters have moved around throughout the process. We'll get that number squared with Chapter 8, which is the managing growth.
Cool. Another thing, I think the objectives are kind of confusing.
Say it again.
The objectives.
Objectives, okay.
Are kind of confusing. In fact, I've been sitting there listening. The majority of questions are come from the objectives, so there's maybe a way to make them more accessible.
Okay. Maybe a little bit more description. They're very short right now.
And how to use it, because you have the phrase on one side and you have numbers on the other side, and that's kind of, you have to go right and left to find something. Another thing that why there is only two options. I know we need to put something somewhere to put a stop, but there's maybe more ways to do than only two. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to agree with Albert back there on the infrastructure, I think the growth, we need to put the horse before the carriage. I think we need to put the infrastructure before the growth. Because for people, if I look at all the numbers on that document about employment and people moving in, a lot of people, if we look at the growth, going to work outside of the city. I go a lot to the airport, and if there is one accident, that road is locked. You go nowhere. So, if people come work here, live here and work here, it's great. But if you have to take only that road, and you have a chance not to go to work, that's not going to happen. That's great comment. And if you go to the compendium of community input, that's a great word. I have to go to the dictionary to figure it out. Almost 1 out of 5 words is traffic. That's again, that you should change that because, I had no clue what that means. Compendium, I had to go look at it. That should be an easier word probably to use, Michael, on that. But again, thanks, thanks for the good job, and thanks for letting us.
Anybody else would like to speak? Again, thank you to Bill McCord, our planning department, our planning commissioners, and the city council. Michael Skipper, thank y'all for showing up and giving us a view of what we envision for the future.
Well, thank you very much. And I just will do one last reminder that plangallatin.org is where you can go access the document, and then there's a link to a comment form that'll ask you a series of questions, but also just allow you to itemize, proposed edits that you might have. And any suggestions that anybody has about those proposed actions will be entertained as we go into the second draft.
I know you will. Thank you. At this time, we close this meeting. Motion to adjourn. Got a second? Second. All in favor say aye. Let's see it.